So by Hashem's loving kindness, may grant us great illumination in this week's Parshot, actually like this Torah lecture. I'm going to be speaking on redemption, resurrection, and Passover. We're going to sort of forego, we can get into the Torah text after this short shurim. And the reason why I wanted to bring it up is, and I titled it in such a way as to cause people to go, like what resurrection and what redemption and what are you talking about on Passover? So it's really important. I don't know if you're aware, but the haftarah portion this week is Ezekiel's vision of the dry bones. And that's the haftarah portion. And we wonder, well, how does these really relate to Pesach? There's a very interesting midrash that I figured that I could bring and share with you. That's something you may or may not know. And this chapter appears at first glance to be sort of a parable or a prophetic example. And there is really no point in asking whose bones did Ezekiel prophesy to. And the reason why is there's some information that we get encoded into the Gemara, also in Psalms, that helps point to whose dry bones he was talking about, or whose dry bones will it be talking about. Nevertheless, this question comes up in many distraught of the sages, the derashos of the sages. This has been discussed many times, and I would like to take time to focus on the exegetical tradition on this subject, and through interpretation that we relate to the vision of dry bones back to the festival of Pesach, and what does it really mean? And once I began to understand its connection, oh, somebody's buying supper tonight.
I was just looking forward to turn it off.
Yeah, okay, I knew you were. That's beautiful. We're going to find out how it connects. When we realize how the Ezekiel story and Passover, it's going to bring us to a consciousness that we in the 21st century are very aware of a redemptive thing getting ready to come, right? We kind of see the handwriting on the wall. But it's important for us to remain vigilant and patient, to trust Hashem that He's going to make this thing unfold. The Talmudic discussion in a tractate of Sanhedrin 92b begins by deliberating in principle whether Ezekiel actually resurrected the dead or whether it was only sort of a parable about some future event that was going to take place. Now, the Talmud continues with a disagreement among those who held the first view, and that is it was just merely sort of a parable or metaphor. Whether the resurrection only for a short time in order to prove that the Lord deals with death and gives life, or whether they came to life and returned to the land of Israel, took themselves wives and begot children. In the wake of the latter view, the question arises as to who were the bones in Ezekiel's resurrection. So let's read. He says, who are the dead whom Ezekiel resurrected? Rav said, they were the descendants of Ephraim. Have you guys heard about Ephraim leaving Egypt early? Right? So here, who calculated the end and error, as it is said, the sons of Ephraim, Shutla, and his son Bered, his son Tachath, his son Eliath, his son Zabad, his son, and he goes on and on and on. He says, and Ephraim, their father, mourned many days, and his brothers came to comfort him. A strange story found in 1 Chronicles about the sons of Ephraim. And as a matter of fact, the grandson of Ephraim actually was the sort of the leader of the whole thing that said, let's go, it's time. It's been 100 years after. Redemption hasn't taken place. Let's pack up and head home. So, to state that Ephraim, the ancestor of the tribe, mourned the descendants who were born 7 or 8 generations later, indeed calls us for an interpretation. Further, what does or who calculated the end and error mean? Rashi in his commentary in the Gemara explains this, and erred. He explains, for they should have calculated the edict, and they shall be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. You remember at the time in which God said this, Genesis 15:13. From the birth of Isaac, but they, the sons of Ephraim, calculated it from the moment God spoke to Abraham. This was the disparity of calculation. It is taught in Seder Olam, the reckoning of the universe is what that's the Seder Olam, that our forefathers, Abraham, was 70 years old when God spoke to him at the covenant of pieces, and another 30 years had passed from the covenant of pieces until the birth of Isaac, for it is written, now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him, Genesis 21:5. Thus, it turns out that from that time he spoke to him in the covenant of pieces until they left Egypt, there were 430 years. And the sons of Ephraim erred by 30 years time frame. Now, what was their error? They said that it must be fast time that we get out of here and go to Canaan. Rashi's interpretation is based on the discrepancy between God's promise to Abraham and the covenant of pieces. And quote, it says in Exodus 12:40, it says, and they shall be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. And the scripture remarks that with regard to the exodus from Egypt, the length of time that the Israelites lived in Egypt was 430 years. The tribe of Ephraim erred in the calculation of the exile from Egypt and actually left Egypt before the appointed time, which the sages called pushing or hastening redemption. Now, what is one of the things that we hear from the sages when it says to contemplate, or the idea of contemplating Mashiach? Do you remember what they said? Remember what the sages said about contemplating times and dates and when Mashiach's going to come and if he's... We shouldn't. I mean, we're kind of a little Mashiach obsessed. I understand that. We see signs in New York and Crown Heights that says Mashiach now, right? We understand. And we all would like the Mashiach to come. We all would love for the final redemption to take place. The problem is we are being forewarned in this text. And the reason why the sages of blessed memory attaches the haftarah for Pesach is this very reason, as to maintain vigilance and patience for redemption to take place, to not get ahead of the game. What did Ephraim do? It says that Ephraim, the grandson of Ephraim, and now the name just totally slipped my mind. Yadmam? Yes. Huh? No, it's why. I'll think of it in a second. If it comes to me, I'll tell you. But his grandson basically stood up in front of everybody and said, look, it's time. It's been way past the time. It's time for redemption to take place. Who's with me? Well, obviously his father and grandfather shook their head like, I can't believe this is happening. And most people said, this is not the right time. As a matter of fact, we see that same dynamic that took place after World War II. Right? Here we go. There's a lot of Jews that says, let's go, let's leave. A lot of the Orthodox Haredi says, this is not the time. As a matter of fact, people in the Haredi community doesn't believe that Israel should be a state because it's not legit, because it's secular. So that same mindset is actually really there still. Now, can I at some level see their point based on this text? Yes. Why? Because there were elders within the community that said, it's not time. This is not the right time. So what happened? Ephraim and those people agreed, and there were some other people from other tribes that went, but predominantly number was the Ephraimites. They leave, they get in the region in which God said, now we know why God says, I cannot lead them the way of the Philistines, because what? They would go to war and become discouraged and turn back. This is precisely what happened. They got there, and it said that the leadership of the group, they had been traveling for like 4 days. They were hungry, they were tired, and they wanted to bargain for some sheep with some of the Gath people. And they said, no, we're not going to sell you any of our sheep. So they decided, we'll just take them because we're hungry, which ended up starting a huge dispute. And one of the shepherds took off and told what was going on, and the whole clan of people came out. And when they fought the battle, it says that the grandson of Ephraim, when he looked into the field and saw all of the bodies laying in the valley, he's like, there's no way. Without God's help, this is not going to happen. We're not going to win this battle. It said that they turned back and went home and left their corpses on the ground. As a matter of fact, they were not allowed to bury their bodies. So, this is why it says that Ezekiel was prophesying for those people to be resurrected and return and to go to Canaan, to finally get the reward. It wasn't that, yes, they erred, yes, they failed, yes, it was a complete debacle, but nevertheless, they were still eager to inherit the land that their father had for them. Now, the derasha ties the vision of the dry bones to Passover. So what it was, so that it was chosen in this haftarah for the intervening Shabbat of the festivals. And the homilist created an exegetical connection between the prophetic vision, foretelling the return of Zion from Babylon as well, the exile by Ezekiel and the exodus from Egypt, comparing one exodus to the other. This connection reinforces the message of the vision that, and the rabbis teach us, that the same God who delivered Israel out of Egypt and who delivered them from Babylonian exile will absolutely, utterly deliver them from the Gilul, or from the, you know, the separation from the land now. The educational message of the homily, however, goes further. The story of the descendants of Ephraim who hastened the end, were killed, and were resurrected, teaches another ideological lesson, which concerns the sages. This message is presented better in a variation of a Talmudic homily that appears in Yalkut Shimoni. It's in First Chronicles, paragraph 1070. It said this: Rabbi Eliezer said, all the years that the Israelites were in Egypt, the Ephraimites dwelled complacently in peace and security until noon. One of the descendants of Ephraim came and said, the Holy One, blessed be He, revealed Himself to me. Take you out in His pride, for they were of royal line and mighty heroes of war. They arose and took their sons and daughters and left Egypt. Then the Egyptians rose and killed their heroes. It's just a bad decision. This variation is far more critical of the descendants of Ephraim, presenting them as an elite that did not share the suffering of the Israelite people. So what we're getting here is it appears that there were some of the Israelite people who still considered themselves royalty because they were Joseph's sons. Right? They were elitist. They didn't suffer with the rest of Israelites. They didn't know what it was like to be oppressed. And so they decided, we're just going to leave. We deserve this. And the Egyptian Pyro at the time had them killed. What is the concept of hastening the end? Hastening the end is not presented in this case as an innocent mistake stemming from good intentions, but as revolt against God. Why is it a revolt against God? Okay, so if I understood you right, you said because it wasn't God's time.
No, because God so chosen
Well, that's a good thought. That's why suicide is such a detrimental thing to a spiritual person, because you're saying, I'm in control, and I choose, and it's not God's time, Royce?
Well, God has already given us the tools. Just talk about redemption. He's given us the tools to hasten redemption. And those tools are not focusing on actually trying to make it happen, but focusing on the relationships with people.
Right.
So if you focus on the end goal, you miss on what's necessary to get us to the end goal, and you actually prevent it from happening.
Very good. Very, very good point. And
you're working against Hashem.
Right.
When you try and take control.
I totally get that, yes. So the whole idea is that hasten redemption is a rebellion against God, because God has a plan, and this plan includes you having to go to go and work through the process. And I remember having this discussion with some people within the B'nai Noah Ger movement, who talked about, well, we've got to do this, and we have to do that, and we have to get out there and do this, this, and that. I'm like, you don't understand. What you need to do is serve Hashem and let Him begin to open things up at His time. And I really do believe that that's something we still can count on, Royce.
If we had the power and control to hasten it, we wouldn't be worthy to participate in it.
Well, that's a very good point, yes. So that's a very good point. So the idea is that that there is a profound level of tikkun and repair in waiting for God's time. And that tikkun and repair that we're talking about, even though it was only 30 years later they were leaving Egypt. 30 years later, that close. That close. And so often I know that many of us who come from the righteous of the nations to embrace Torah, we become very eager to hasten our relationship with Hashem by doing grandiose things from Torah law, correct? And we've all been there, so it's not like anybody in this room doesn't have some level of guilt in this thing. But the whole point is we want to achieve great and grandiose things, and most of us end up coming to the reality we have to wait on God's time. And we have to do things according to God's manifest destiny for not only us, but for His people, the Jewish people. With that being said, may we, in this Passover, in this Pesach, look at Pesach in a different light. Look at the fact that this is not just about Egypt and what happened in Egypt. It's also about all the times that God has been faithful to deliver His people. And that finally, we will see a final redemption that takes place. It'll eclipse the first redemption out of Egypt. It'll eclipse the Babylonian exile. We're going to have something that is going to be so huge and so big, it's going to be worth the wait. But nobody is capable of doing or hastening redemption without causing some level of spiritual duress or frustration. And that's why I would suggest that each one of us be patient as we wait for redemption. Let us not be like the cults of the world that want to hasten some apocalyptic end by having destruction come upon the world. And what they end up doing is end up destroying their clans of people. There's the Jim Jones, there's the David Koreshes of the world. There was, what was the name of the guy in Japan that did the same thing with hundreds of people? This is the result of a cultic obsession with apocalyptic end of days things. We are not a part of that. We don't play that. We look for redemption because redemption is going to be sweet. Is the time prior to redemption going to be tough? Doggone right. It's going to have some tough times. But redemption is going to be sweet. Toby?
Thinking about it, it took a while for the Jews, a certain time for the Jews to exit Egypt. So, what we have been waiting, has been nearly 10 times that. So, right. That means it's probably going to be
10 times better. Yeah, that's a very good point. Very good point. 10 times better. Can you imagine, Bryce?
If this is off topic, that's fine.
Oh, go ahead.
You talk about redemption as sweet, and we all look forward to the promises to come, but a thought occurs to me. My wife has this little placard that says, you know, we're not here to weather the storm. We're here to learn how to dance in the rain.
That's good. I like that.
The thought occurs to me is that who says there's not going to be conflict and struggle even after redemption? If you think about it, it defines who we are. It builds our character.
Right.
Who says that Hashem is going to stop building our character once we have redemption?
That's a legitimate point. I think that though the source of all conflict seems to be the result of sin, and we know that there's not going to be the issue of sin, so if there is conflict, it's going to be in some other aspect, I would think.
I would disagree with you, because a lot of conflict comes not from sin, but just from differences of opinion.
Well, the problem, yeah, that's true, but we won't have a Yetzer. Yes.
They will be expanding the cities of refuge, though. There are like two
that's
or
true.
3 more cities that will be built.
Right, so I would agree that there's going to be some level of conflict, but it's not going to be the result of sin, though. Or the Yetzer, or, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination.
Well, a simple, stupid example is, and don't take the word stupid too far, but let's say my wife and I, we want to go out for a date tonight.
Okay.
I want to go bowling. She wants to go play darts. And so we're sitting here having an argument about which are we going to do. So there's no sin, there's no Yetzer Hara.
Right. No, of course. Okay, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying, but hopefully you won't need a city of refuge after the argument. Okay? It's the only thing that I would be concerned about. So, you know, with that being said, we have something to look forward to. Pesach is a wonderful time, and it's not just when we have when we do our Seder this year. Don't be just thinking of the past. Think about the fact that this Pesach also belongs to our future redemption.